The descent from the high spires of Ethelgard was a journey backward through time, a regression from the ethereal heights of Alendi achievement down into the brutal, forgotten foundations of their exile. Pelomir walked alone, leaving behind the vaulted arches of spun diamond and the floors of woven glass that hummed with captured starlight. With every spiraling revolution of the great central stairwell, the architecture grew heavier, thicker, and less forgiving. The pristine, pale crystal gave way to veins of dull obsidian. The soft, ambient glow of the upper levels faded, replaced by the harsh, localized glare of lumen strips recessed into thick rock. The air itself changed, losing the sweet, sterile scent of ozone and chilled water. Down here, in the roots of the station, the atmosphere was dense and ancient, tasting of scorched iron, old lubricants, and the deep, abiding heat of the geothermal core. For Pelomir, the descent was a physical torment that mirrored the failing of his vessel. With every step down the long, spiraling metal staircases, his boots seemed to meet the iron grating a fraction of a second too late, as if the physical laws of the universe were lagging behind his intentions. He was forced to focus his entire will simply to keep his feet from passing through the floorboards. He walked with a stiff, unnatural gait, terrified that a moment's distraction would send him plummeting through the solid matter of the station and into the crushing gravity of the core. He was disappearing. He could feel it not merely in his hands, but in the very center of his chest, a hollow, airy sensation where his heart should have been beating. The thinning was accelerating, driven by his formal severing from the archives and the terrible knowledge of the journey ahead. At last, exhausted and shivering with a cold that radiated from within his own dissipating atoms, he reached the end of the lowest corridor. Before him stood the massive doors of the deep armory. They were not wrought with the elegant, flowing curves of the starkin. They were forged of heavy, solid brass and thick, unforgiving steel, scored and pitted with the marks of ancient cosmic dust from the days when the station was first built and the universe was still a hostile, untamed place. Pelomir raised his pale, flickering hands to push the heavy doors open. He leaned his weight against the brass. Nothing happened. He fell forward, his hands, wrists, and forearms phasing entirely through the solid metal of the doors without the slightest resistance. He stumbled, his chest striking the brass plating, and for a terrifying, agonizing moment, he felt himself sinking directly into the molecular structure of the door itself. He was trapped horribly between states of being, neither solid matter nor pure starfire. Panic flared in his chest, cold, sharp, and distinctly mortal. He closed his eyes and screamed inwardly, gathering the last remnants of his essence. He visualized the dense dirt of Terra Prime. He pictured the thick, suffocating mud, the rusted iron gear on his desk, the brutal, undeniable, heavy reality of the cradle. He demanded gravity of his own failing form. With a ragged, tearing gasp, his body solidified enough. His palms suddenly found purchase on the cold brass. His boots gripped the grated floor. Gritting his teeth against the agonizing strain that threatened to tear his mind apart, Pelomir pushed with all his remaining might. The heavy hinges groaned, a loud, grinding sound echoing in the dark, and the brass doors of the armory yielded to the pilgrim. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber devoid of all grace. In Ethelgard, where every archway was a song rendered in stone and every window a calculation in light, the deep armory stood as a deliberate affront. It was a brutalist vault of dark iron and thick utilitarian shadow, lit only by the sputtering, angry orange glare of forge fires and the harsh glow of localized energy fields. It was a place where the Starkin did not build to inspire the spirit, but to defend the fragile flesh against the terrifying realities of the physical universe. 3 figures awaited him in the gloom. They were not elders, nor were they archivists. They were the artificers of the deep, beings who had bound their long lives not to the stars, but to the forge. They were clad in heavy aprons of dark synth leather, their faces entirely obscured by the thick protective visors of their welding helms. They did not speak, for their task was one of grim, mechanical necessity, not of comfort or philosophy. They moved with slow, deliberate heaviness, an echo of the artificial gravity they worked with daily. In the center of the chamber, suspended within a cradle of humming violet stasis fields, hung the sovereign suit. Pelomir stopped before it, his heart sinking further into the hollow of his chest. It was a terrifying thing to behold. Unlike the sleek, frictionless garments of the starkin, designed to amplify the grace of the wearer, the suit was a massive, hulking carapace of dark, light-devouring metamaterial. It looked less like armor and more like a sarcophagus built for a giant of the elder days. Its surface was entirely devoid of ornamentation, save for deep, archaic runes of binding scored into the dark metal. These were not the elegant, flowing scripts of the Alendi histories, but harsh, jagged lines of raw mathematics, ancient equations designed to chain volatile energy to stagnant matter. The suit possessed thick, segmented plating across the chest and shoulders, and heavy, articulated joints that looked as though they required the strength of a falling star merely to bend. To wear such a thing was to admit complete and utter defeat. It was to lock oneself in a sensory prison, to trade the boundless, frictionless freedom of the high spires for a heavy, suffocating box of iron and wire. It was the ultimate humiliation for a being of light to be forced back into the dirt. "You have lingered to the very edge of dissolution, Voyager," a voice echoed from the shadows behind the forge fires. It was Voronoi. The elder had descended by a faster, hidden transit shaft, and now stood near the flames, the flickering orange light casting long, deep, and sorrowful shadows across his ancient face. He held in his hands a thick, heavy harness of woven power cables, the umbilicals that would connect the suit's heart to Pelomir's fading vessel. Pelomir looked from the elder to the terrifying armor suspended in the violet light. He reached out a hand, fully translucent now, the bones visible as pale lines of smoke, and tried to touch the dark metal of the breastplate. His fingers sank a full inch into the material before finding any resistance. "It is a tomb." "A tomb holds the dead, Pelomir," Voronoi corrected softly, stepping forward and signaling the silent artificers to power down the fields. "This heavy thing holds the living, preserving them against the dark until they can be reborn in the mud of the source." The violet fields dimmed, and the sovereign suit settled into the iron cradle with a sound like a coffin laid upon stone. Tiny currents of residual energy crawled across its surface and died among the jagged runes. "There are no ledgers where you are going," Voronoi said. "There is only the void, and then the mud. Disrobe, Pelomir. The vessel must be sealed before the tether snaps completely." With fingers that felt entirely numb and terrifyingly insubstantial, Pelomir reached for the clasps of the simple gray undertunic he wore. He let it fall to the iron floor, standing naked in the cold, harsh light of the armory. He looked upon his own body with a detached, clinical horror. He was disappearing. The edges of his torso were blurred, his skin so pale it seemed to generate its own faint, ghostly illumination. He was a creature of moonlight, rapidly fading before the dawn. The artificers approached, their heavy boots ringing loud against the grating. They moved with absolute, practiced precision, lifting the heavy greaves of the sovereign suit from their racks. "Brace yourself," Voronoi warned. "The binding is not gentle. It forces the starfire back into the clay. It will feel as though you are being crushed beneath the weight of an ocean." Pelomir nodded once, closing his eyes, trying to find a center of calm amid the rising panic of his own dissolution. The first artificer locked the heavy, dark greave around his right leg. The moment the magnetic seals clamped shut, a violent shockwave tore up Pelomir's spine. It was not pain as a mortal might understand it. It was not the searing heat of a burn or the sharp agony of a cut, but rather a sudden, terrifying compression of his very being. The suit was artificially increasing his local gravity, forcing his dissipating atoms to smash back together into a solid state. He gasped, a ragged, wet sound, his eyes flying open as the left greave was attached, sending another bone-rattling jolt through his fragile frame. Next came the gauntlets, thick, cumbersome, and heavily armored, sealing over his translucent hands. As the power cables connected, the translucence vanished instantly, replaced by the solid, undeniable dark metal of the armor. But his hands felt trapped, heavy, and incredibly clumsy. The delicate fingertips that had turned the pages of light-woven histories were now encased in thick, blunt iron. He tried to flex his fingers, and the servos in the joints whined in loud protest, fighting against his profound weakness. Then they hoisted the massive breastplate. It took 2 of the heavy artificers to lift it, the dark metamaterial absorbing the orange light of the forge, reflecting nothing back. They brought it against Pelomir's chest, and as the heavy locking mechanisms engaged with a series of loud, metallic clunks, he felt the breath driven violently from his lungs. The weight was staggering, an immediate, crushing burden. For 10,000 years he had lived in an environment where gravity was a gentle, almost artistic suggestion. Now it was a physical assault. He staggered, his knees buckling under the sudden, immense weight. Voronoi stepped forward instantly, catching Pelomir by the thick, articulated armor of his arm to keep him from falling to the iron floor. "Hold fast. If you fall now, the suit will register catastrophic failure and lock its joints, and you will not have the strength to rise. You must bear the weight, Pelomir. You must remember the earth." Pelomir gritted his teeth, forcing air back into his compressed lungs with a sheer effort of will. The suit hummed around him, a low, constant, aggressive vibration that set his teeth on edge and rattled the bones he had nearly forgotten he possessed. The internal life support systems engaged, injecting a harsh, metallic-tasting air mixture directly into his throat, devoid of the sweet, floral scents of Ethelgard. He forced himself to stand straight, fighting the crushing weight of the breastplate, his artificial heart pounding in time with the suit's coolant pumps. The last artificer stepped forward, holding the helm, a heavy, featureless dome of dark metamaterial, save for a narrow visor of thick glass. Before they lowered it over his head, Voronoi raised a hand. The elder stepped very close, looking directly into Pelomir's fading eyes. "Listen well, Pelomir. Once the helm is locked, the communion of our people is closed to you. You will be alone." Voronoi's gaze was steady, stripped of comfort but free of cruelty. "The suit will bind your spirit to the flesh, but its strength is finite. Every step you take drains the reserve. If the power fails before you reach Terra Prime, the containment will break. You will vent into the vacuum, and you will be lost. Conserve your strength." Pelomir felt a cold spike of genuine terror beneath the heavy breastplate. "How long do I have?" "Enough for a direct transit through the middle lanes, if the ancient slipstreams hold," Voronoi replied. "But the lanes are a graveyard of the first expansion. You will find automated sentinels there, ancient machines bound to the dead laws of ruined empires. Do not try to fight them. The suit's weapons are gone. All power is routed to your survival. You must use your wits to pass them." Voronoi reached out, placing a hand upon the heavy shoulder pauldron. "And remember the vow. At the borders of the Sol system, the Pilgrim protocols will sever your engines. You will cross the last gulf in silence. You will strike the atmosphere of the cradle unpowered. It will be a hard and terrifying fall." "And if I am broken upon the shore?" Pelomir asked, his voice echoing slightly in the gloomy chamber. "Then you must crawl," Voronoi answered. "Drag yourself through the mud to the spires of Houston. The children of the sun dwell there now among the rusted towers. They are a loud and hasty people, and their world is chaotic. Do not look away from them, Pelomir. It is their very restlessness, their fierce grip upon the present moment, that anchors the cradle. Let their noise ground you. Veronway stepped back, nodding to the waiting artificer. May the silent stars guide you, voyager. The artificer lowered the heavy helm over Pelomir's head. The locking rings engaged instantly with a sharp hiss of pressurized gas. The outside world, the forge fires, the artificers, Veronway himself, vanished, replaced by the absolute, suffocating darkness of the suit's interior. For a terrible second, Pelomir thought he was entirely blind. Then the internal display flickered to life. A faint amber glow illuminated the narrow slit of his visor. Streams of raw data scrolled across his vision: structural integrity, external temperature, containment stability, and the slow, steady countdown of his internal power reserves. The ambient noise of the deep armory was completely gone, replaced entirely by the sound of his own ragged, amplified breathing and the deep rhythmic thud of the suit's life support fluids pumping around his compressed body. He was completely, utterly isolated. Proceed to the launch bay. The Pilgrim skiff is primed. The long dark awaits. Pelomir took his first step in the sovereign suit. It was an agonizing effort of pure will. He had to consciously command the servos in his legs to fire, fighting the immense weight of the armor. His heavy boots struck the iron grating with a deafening metallic clang that reverberated through his bones. He took another step, then another, his movements jerky and slow. He walked past the silent artificers he could barely see through the amber visor, past the dying forge fires he could no longer feel, and out of the deep armory. He walked down the long, dark corridor toward the airlock, every heavy, echoing footfall a harsh reminder of his own fragility. He was a prisoner in a dark shell, beginning the long walk to the dirt.